In the aftermath of a catastrophic strategic attack on a nation's homeland, the traditional doctrines of intelligence gathering and warfare are often deemed insufficient. The established legal and ethical frameworks that govern the conduct of a state are seen not as pillars of strength, but as operational constraints in a new and asymmetric form of conflict. It is within this crucible of national fear and strategic urgency that new and often secret methodologies are forged. This is an analysis of one such methodology, the rendition, detention, and interrogation program, a global infrastructure of clandestine prisons and coercive questioning techniques operated beyond the reach of public scrutiny and conventional legal oversight. These facilities, known in the common vernacular as black sites, represent a paradigm shift in the practice of modern intelligence, a deliberate and systematic effort to create a space of legal and moral exception. The core principle of the black site program is that of extralegality. The sites are established in foreign nations, often with the covert cooperation of host governments, for the specific purpose of operating outside the jurisdiction of the sponsoring nation's own domestic court system and constitutional protections. They are legal black holes, designed from their inception to be beyond the reach of any judge or human rights convention. This operational model is built upon the foundational doctrine of plausible deniability. Officially, these facilities do not exist. Their locations are classified at the highest level. Their funding is hidden in obscure annexes of intelligence budgets. Their very existence is a secret, known only to a small, compartmentalized group of policymakers and operators. This official non-existence is a strategic necessity. It is a firewall designed to protect the sponsoring government from the inevitable political and legal blowback should the program's true nature ever be exposed. The black sites are ghosts, and a government cannot be held accountable for the actions of a ghost. This, then, is a clinical dissection of that ghostly infrastructure. It is an examination of the program's legal architecture, its global network, the human supply chain that fed it, the specific techniques employed within its walls, and the ultimate, inevitable unraveling of its secrecy. It is the anatomy of a system that was never meant to be seen. The entire program, while operating in a legal void, was paradoxically enabled by a carefully constructed legal architecture. In the years following the September 11th attacks, a series of secret legal memoranda were drafted by the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel. These documents, which would later become known as the torture memos, were the secret charter for the new program. Their purpose was to create a new, radically narrow, and highly technical definition of the word torture. Under international and domestic law, torture was, and is, unequivocally illegal. The memos did not seek to challenge this fact, but to circumvent it. They sought to legally define a space of permissible cruelty that fell just short of their own new definition of torture. The memos argued, for example, that for an act to constitute torture, it must inflict pain that is equivalent in intensity to the pain accompanying serious physical injury, such as organ failure or even death. This created a high and almost absurdly specific threshold. Any act of coercion that did not meet this extreme standard, the memos concluded, was not, in the legal opinion of the executive branch, torture. These lesser, but still profoundly brutal acts were given a new, sterile, and bureaucratic name, Enhanced Interrogation Techniques, or EITs. This legal framework, however controversial and later discredited, was the essential key that unlocked the door to the Black Site program. It provided the operators on the ground with a form of legal pre-approval, a shield of authorization from the highest levels of their government. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering, designed to allow the state to engage in practices that the world would recognize as torture, while maintaining the official, legalistic position that no laws were being broken. It was the first and most fundamental layer of the program's secrecy and deniability. With this legal architecture in place, a global network of secret prisons was established. The selection of host nations was a matter of careful strategic calculation. The ideal partner was a country with a compliant and discreet intelligence service, a political structure that could ensure absolute secrecy, and a strategic location relative to the primary theaters of the new war. Over the course of several years, a series of these sites were established, often given simple color code names to obscure their location and purpose. Each site was a unique and compartmentalized part of a larger, global system. One of the first and most notorious of these was Detention Site Green, located in Thailand. It was here that some of the first high-value detainees were taken, and where the enhanced interrogation techniques were first implemented and refined. In Eastern Europe, a new set of sites were established to handle the growing number of detainees captured in the global war. Detention Site Blue, located in Poland, and Detention Site Black in Romania became central processing hubs for the program. Another site, Detention Site Violet, was established in Lithuania. These European sites were often located on quiet, isolated properties, sometimes disguised as private villas or rural estates, their true purpose known only to a handful of senior officials in the host government and the intelligence agency. In Afghanistan, the primary theater of operations, several sites were used. The most infamous of these was Detention Site Cobalt, a facility located in a former brick factory outside of Kabul, which became known to its inmates as the Salt Pit. It was a place of particular brutality and despair. This global network of hidden prisons was the physical infrastructure of the doctrine of extralegality. A detainee could be captured in one country, flown to a black site in another for interrogation, and then rendered to a third country for long-term imprisonment, all without ever entering the legal system of any nation. The human supply chain that fed this network was a process known as extraordinary rendition. This was the practice of apprehending a suspected terrorist in one country and covertly transferring him, outside of any legal extradition process, to the custody of the intelligence agency in another. This was a highly organized and sophisticated logistical operation. It relied on a fleet of privately contracted civilian-style jets, often registered to front companies to conceal their connection to the government. These were the ghost planes of the new war. A target could be seized off the street in a European city, hooded and shackled, and driven to a secret airfield. There, he would be handed over to a rendition team, often composed of paramilitary officers from the agency's Special Activities Division. From the moment of capture, a deliberate process of psychological disorientation would begin. The detainee would be stripped naked, their heads shaved, and they would be subjected to a medical examination. They were then dressed in a diaper and a jumpsuit, hooded, and fitted with sound-blocking headphones. They were shackled in a painful stress position for the duration of the long flight, deprived of all sensory input. They did not know where they had been taken from, where they were going, or who their captors were. The goal was to break down their psychological resistance before the first question was ever asked. This process was designed to be a seamless and efficient conveyor belt, delivering a human being from a state of freedom, however limited, to a state of total dependency and isolation in a black site, often in a matter of hours. It was a system that operated completely outside the known laws of the world. Upon arrival at a black site, the detainee was introduced to an environment of absolute and total control. The entire facility was designed not just for containment, but as a psychological weapon, an instrument for the systematic dismantling of a human being's will to resist. The primary tool of this environment was isolation. The detainee was kept in a state of solitary confinement, often for weeks or months on end. He had no contact with any other human being except his interrogators and his guards, who were themselves anonymous figures behind masks. The sensory environment was also meticulously controlled. His cell could be kept in a state of total, unending darkness, or it could be blasted with bright lights 24 hours a day. He could be subjected to a constant barrage of loud, disorienting noise, or a profound and maddening silence. Every single aspect of his biological existence was placed under the direct control of his captors. His diet could be manipulated, his access to sanitation could be restricted, and, most critically, his ability to sleep could be denied. The goal of this controlled environment was to induce a state of profound psychological regression, a condition of learned helplessness. The detainee was to be reduced to a state of infantile dependency on his interrogators. They became the sole source of any relief or any suffering, the gods of his small, dark universe. Within this environment of total control, the specific, approved enhanced interrogation techniques were applied. These were not random acts of brutality, but a graduated and scientifically designed series of coercive methods, each with a specific psychological purpose. The process often began with the lesser techniques. These included the attention grasp, where the interrogator would seize the detainee's collar and shake him, and the facial hold, where the interrogator would hold the detainee's head immobile between his hands. These were acts of physical assertion designed to establish dominance. The next step was often walling, a technique in which the detainee would be pulled forward and then slammed backward against a specially constructed, flexible wall. This was designed to create a powerful shock and to disorient the subject without causing serious physical injury. Stress positions were a key component of the methodology. A detainee would be forced to stand or to kneel in a painful and unnatural position for hours on end. This created immense physical discomfort and was a primary tool of sleep deprivation. The most common method of sleep deprivation was to shackle the detainee in a standing position, with his hands chained to a bolt high on the wall. He would be kept in this position for days at a time, unable to sit or to lie down. The goal was the complete destruction of his cognitive abilities and his will to resist. Nudity was also a standard and continuous procedure. Detainees were often kept naked for the entire duration of their interrogation, a simple but powerful technique designed to induce feelings of humiliation, vulnerability, and cultural shame. These techniques, used in combination over a period of days and weeks, were designed to create a state of profound physical and psychological exhaustion, a state in which the detainee was believed to be more susceptible to questioning. For the most resistant of detainees, a series of even more extreme techniques were authorized. The most infamous and most brutal of these was the procedure known as waterboarding. Waterboarding is a highly clinical and controlled form of suffocation. The detainee is strapped to a board, often with his feet elevated above his head. A cloth is placed over his face, and water is poured over it in a controlled and continuous stream. The effect is the immediate and uncontrollable triggering of the gag reflex and the deep, primal, and terrifying sensation of drowning. The subject's body is convulsed by a desperate and involuntary struggle for air. He believes, in that moment, that he is dying. This procedure could be repeated multiple times, its application carefully monitored by medical personnel to ensure the subject did not actually die. Its purpose was to induce a state of near-death terror, to bring the detainee to a point of complete and total psychological collapse. Other, more esoteric techniques were also authorized, designed to exploit the specific, known phobias of an individual detainee. A detainee with a known fear of insects could be placed in a small confinement box with harmless insects, an act of pure psychological torture. Mock burials were also used to create a sense of utter hopelessness. These were the apex techniques of the program, the final and most brutal application of coercive force. They represented the logical endpoint of a system that had deliberately chosen to operate in a space beyond the reach of law and of conventional morality. The entire justification for this vast and secret apparatus of rendition and coercive interrogation was a single, overriding purpose: the acquisition of actionable intelligence. The program was sold to policymakers and to the agency's own officers as a necessary and effective tool for preventing future terrorist attacks. The question of its efficacy is therefore of central importance. The most comprehensive and authoritative public analysis of this question was the report produced by the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, a document that took years to compile and was based on the review of millions of internal agency documents. The report's conclusion was stark and unambiguous. It found that the use of these enhanced interrogation techniques was not an effective means of acquiring accurate intelligence. It found that the program was poorly managed, that its claims of success were unsubstantiated, and that it produced a significant amount of fabricated and unreliable information. The reason for this failure is a simple and well-understood psychological one. A person who is being subjected to extreme pain and psychological distress will, in the end, say anything that he thinks his tormentors want to hear in order to make the suffering stop. The report documented numerous cases where detainees, under coercive interrogation, confessed to plots that did not exist, or implicated innocent individuals, sending intelligence agencies on a series of wild goose chases that wasted valuable time and resources. The program, therefore, failed to meet even its own stated operational objectives. It was not just a moral and legal catastrophe, it was an operational and intelligence failure of the first order. This was the final, damning verdict on the entire enterprise. A system designed for absolute secrecy is a system that is inherently fragile. It can be undone by a single, conscientious whistleblower, a single, determined journalist, or a single, careless mistake. The unraveling of the Black Site program was a slow, piecemeal, but ultimately inevitable process. The first public indications of its existence came not from official sources, but from the work of human rights organizations and investigative journalists. They began to track the movements of the ghost planes, to interview the families of the disappeared, and to piece together the disparate fragments of the global network. The political firestorm truly erupted, however, with the exposure of the Abu Ghraib prison scandal in Iraq. While this was a military and not a CIA scandal, the shocking photographs of prisoner abuse created a global outcry and opened the floodgates for further investigation into the treatment of detainees across the board. The final and most decisive blow to the program's secrecy was the political battle over, and the eventual public release of, the executive summary of the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on torture. This document, for the first time, placed the details of the program, its methods, its locations, its failures into the official, public record. Simultaneously, the European Court of Human Rights began to issue a series of landmark rulings against the European nations that had hosted the Black Sites. The court found that countries like Poland, Romania, and Lithuania had been complicit in the program and had violated the fundamental human rights of the detainees held on their soil. The official non-existence of the sites had become an untenable fiction. The legacy of the Black Site program is a complex and a damaging one. It is a story of a nation that, in its response to a great and terrible attack, chose to compromise its own most fundamental legal and moral principles. It created a profound and lasting damage to that nation's moral authority and its standing in the world. The image of a nation that champions democracy and human rights was deeply tarnished by the revelation that it had been operating a secret, offshore network of torture chambers. It created a dangerous precedent for the expansion of unaccountable executive power. It was a demonstration of how a small group of individuals, operating in secret, could create a legal and operational framework that placed itself above the law and beyond the reach of public or congressional oversight. It was a stark and powerful lesson in the corrosive nature of secrecy. A program that is not subject to external scrutiny, a program that officially does not exist, is a program that is almost destined to descend into brutality, mismanagement, and failure. The story of the Black Sites is, in the end, a cautionary tale. It is a reminder that in any great struggle against a brutal and fanatical enemy, the greatest danger is not that one will be defeated, but that in the process of fighting, one will become like the very thing one is trying to destroy.